So happy Juneteenth everyone, and with this video I just want to propose a slight shift, or rather expansion, in the official narrative of Juneteenth. So the story behind the holiday that you're most likely to hear today emphasizes Abraham Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation and General Granger arriving in Galveston to enforce it on June 19th, 1865. And don't get me wrong, that makes sense and is probably the core of that specific narrative of what happened that day. But at the same time, it perhaps unintentionally underemphasizes Black resistance in Texas specifically that ended up making emancipation inevitable. Black resistance by some of those very same Black Texans that became free in 1865. So with that said, for anyone who's interested, here are a few stories of Black Texans that aided in creating the conditions necessary for abolition to ever occur. So in 1835, while mostly white Texans were fighting Mexico for their independence, enslaved Black people along the Brazos River saw it as an opportunity and organized a sophisticated uprising to seize the land for themselves. And the threat was so real that slave owners responded with mass roundups, public whippings, and executions. And the panic reached such intensity that it contributed to the runaway scrape a year later, which is when white families picked up everything and fled their homes, fearing a successful slave revolution alongside a Mexican invasion. Then in 1860, in what became known as the Texas Troubles, fires broke out simultaneously across North Texas with a level of precision that suggested careful planning and organization. These fires destroyed downtown Dallas and half of Denton's Times Square on the same exact day, July 8th. White vigilantes then tortured confessions from enslaved people and executed at least 30 but up to 100 Black people and white abolitionists in response. They even stripped the remaining flesh from one of the men that they lynched and made his bones into something that children could play with. Now these sorts of uprisings helped to make slavery economically unsustainable. Slave owners had to spend massive amounts of money on what would be their profits on surveillance, security, and punishment. This destabilized the entire system from within and directly contributed to the secession that would eventually spark the Civil War. The Texas Troubles that I mentioned before were even blamed on the Republican Party and Abraham Lincoln. And last but not least, let's talk about Jacob Fontaine, a Black man born in Arkansas in 1808 but brought to Austin, Texas in 1839. He worked as a sexton at St. David's Episcopal Church, but secretly preached to Black congregations every afternoon. In 1864, a full year before the Juneteenth emancipation, he was already organizing secret meetings with other Black congregants to break away from the white churches and form their own religious institutions. On top of this, he was directly responsible for helping to upkeep the church, which is the same church that Sam Houston attended, and that's the guy who the city of Houston is named after. And Sam Houston is someone who famously refused to support the Confederacy, undermining Confederate unity in Texas. Now, obviously, these acts of resistance alone were not close to being sufficient enough to actually end slavery nationwide. But they were absolutely necessary because without this constant pressure, without making slavery so dangerous and expensive and keeping these white slave owners on their toes, emancipation would have never happened. Lincoln's proclamation and Granger's announcement were responses to the conditions that Black resistance over decades and hundreds of years drove to create. They weren't just acts of benevolent liberation granted from above. But this is just part of that story, and if you want to learn more and support a Black creator this Juneteenth, feel free to check out this article which I wrote today on my Substack. To do that, you can go to historycan'thide.substack.com, or if you're on Instagram, just comment the word newsletter below and you'll be DM'd a link to my Substack account. Then let me know what you think about this take, and then follow for more history lessons just like this.